If it's leaving, it's cleaving. That is the entire trick to reading the Transonic Blades mid-fight. And if that sentence means nothing to you yet, by the end of this video, it will be second nature. Because this weapon isn't just strong, it plays like two completely different weapons depending on which stance you're in. And today we're breaking down both of them in full, so let's dive in. Weapon purpose. The Transonic Blades are a versatile pair of blades that can fulfill any role you need it to. I like to think of it as the jack of all blades. This is all thanks to its balanced damage profile, which we will take a look in a moment, but also of its unique characteristic of being able to swap stances. Activating the weapon special causes you to switch the attunement of your blades, changing up your moveset and damage profile to be either more suited for horde clearing, which I will call cleaving stance, or single target killing, which I will call assassin stance. You can tell which stance you are in by the direction of the frequency waves on the blade. This is my silly way of remembering it. If the direction of the waves is leaving, then it's cleaving. Remember that and you can immediately tell which stance you're in. But mid-fight, it's a little different. Activating a weapon special while you're attacking triggers a switching animation, and the attack that follows depends on which stance you're entering. If you swap into assassin stance, you get an overhead strike with the dagger. If you swap into cleaving stance, you get an upward cleave with the blade. Both of these hit as hard as your heavy attacks and flow straight into the stance's combos. As a whole, the Transonic Blades can fit into any build and are also relatively easy to use once you understand how the weapon functions. Weapon stats. Because the Transonic Blades are doing two jobs depending on your stance, knowing which stats actually matter and which one you can safely ignore will direct how you build this thing entirely. So let's get a better idea on what exactly we are working with. Being a combination of dagger and blade, the Transonic Blades are very nimble with good dodge distance and have 4 dodges built in. To effectively use this weapon, you are going to want to move around a lot, weaving back and forth while striking enemies with precision hits. If you want to reach the height of this weapon's potential, you'll need to get comfortable being up close with packs of enemies in your face, so make sure you're on your toes and ready to dance. As for its core stats, the Transonic Blades have a mix of damage, this influences your lethal performance, so this is going to be a given to max out. Penetration, this stat affects your armor damage modifiers against flak and carapace enemies, so you'll want to max this out too. This weapon also has both a finesse and critical bonus stat attached to it, making it suited for scoring weak spot and critical hits. More specifically, the finesse stat is also going to give you more attack speed on top of your stronger critical and weak spot multiplier. Meanwhile, the critical bonus stat increases your base critical chance by 6%. Not as high as some of the other crit focused weapons, but a 6% critical chance is basically a free tier 4 perk on the weapon. Max out both of these stats. That leaves us with cleave efficiency, which affects our cleave damage and stagger distribution. Although the Transonic Blades can swap between horde clearing and single target stances, the reduction in cleave efficiency stat won't be very noticeable since the difference between 80% and 60% is 1 point of cleave, which is not enough to cleave through a groaner from mallets onwards. So in other words, you can safely dump the cleave stat to 60% and max everything else out. Now, for the complicated part, the damage profile and attack patterns. Because the Transonic Blade can switch stances, I'm going to talk about both of them here. Starting with the default state, which is the cleaving stance. All the numbers and attack combos you can see in-game refer to this stance. Its light attack chain consists of a flurry of diagonal and horizontal slashes, perfectly suited for mowing down hordes of chaff enemies. Its heavy attack chain is a 2-attack loop which starts with a downward chop and then leads into a horizontal dual strike slash. This second attack counts as 2 separate attacks and is not affected by cleave immunity from carapace armor. Your push attack is an overhead strike, giving you a little bit of precision damage to work with. As for its damage profile, the cleaving stance does a moderate amount of damage, nothing to write home about. That being said, there are a couple of interesting things to take note of. The first is that its heavy 1 single chop deals about 10% more damage than its heavy 2 dual slashes. So while it might seem like using 2 blades would deal more damage to a single target, turns out the single strike dishes out more. Secondly, despite having both a finesse stat and a critical bonus stat, the cleaving stance light attacks have a higher weak spot multiplier of about 2.1 compared to its 1.8 critical multiplier. As for critical weak spot hits, it deals 2.85 times more damage on its light attacks, and this jumps up to 3 times when using its heavy attacks. This tells us that the critical weak spot hits are where the real hard-hitting damage numbers are going to be. That's your cleaving stance, your bread and butter for crowds. But everything changes when armor walks in the door. That's where the assassin stance comes in. The good news is that when switching into the assassin stance, many of the damage profile numbers actually carry over. On top of a slight overall damage boost, it has the same finesse multipliers, same heavy attack characteristics where a single strike deals a bit more damage than the dual strikes, and also the same unique feature where it counts as 2 separate attacks. What does change, however, are your damage modifiers against certain armor types. Notably, you gain about 40% more damage against unyielding armor, so that's Reapers, Bulwarks, and monsters in general. You also deal 2 times more damage against flak armor and about 5 times more damage against carapace, making this stance much more suited for fighting tanky elites. Your attack pattern also switches into a more precise and focused attacks. Your light attack chain now consists of a stab followed by 2 quick overhead strikes, perfect for landing pinpoint attacks against weak spots. As for your heavy attacks, it starts with a downward cross strike, which is then followed by a heavy downwards chop, which then loops. Lastly, your push attack is a quick horizontal slash, giving you the option to quickly cleave a bunch of enemies in a pinch. Hopefully, that explanation was clear enough to understand. Blessing Pool. Now that we've covered the mechanics and the stats of the weapon, we can properly explore its blessing pool to see what we have to work with. This weapon is actually blessed to have many blessings that work well for it, but to make it easier to know what's worth taking and what isn't, I'm going to bucket them as such. One of them is an anchor blessing. There's very little reason why you wouldn't want to take this for any of your builds. Most of them are genuinely good, and only one of them sound good on paper but doesn't quite hold up well in practice. So let's start with what I think is the anchor blessing for the Transonic Blades. Shred. With how strong critical weak spots can be on this weapon, getting up to plus 20% critical chance for simply hitting things is just too good not to take. This weapon is built around finesse damage, and a lot of its strength comes from scoring crits and headshots, leveraging its strong multipliers. Just having this blessing alone will ramp up your damage significantly. As for the one blessing which I think doesn't hold up well, Deadly Frequencies buffs your next melee attack by up to 30% power after you hit an enemy with your weapon's special attack. This blessing is a bit too specific in what it provides, and while I think plus 30% power is a very strong bonus, having access to more damage only when you are swapping stances makes it a bit too niche and maybe a bit clunky to use. Because if you are focused on dealing with elite enemies, you'll naturally want to stay within your assassin stance, and if you're only getting power from changing stances, then that's going to kind of mess up your damage output against them. Everything else can find a place in your build depending on your goal for it and your personal preference. Bladed Momentum, hitting multiple enemies with one sweep, gives you 7% melee rending for 4 seconds, which stacks up to 4 times. Essentially, if you are at least hitting more than one enemy, you can get an additional 28% rending for the Transonic Blades. Given that we know you can always at least hit 2 enemies with some of your heavy attacks, especially against crushers, this seems like a decent blessing and it might find a place if your build is going to totally ignore the System Shock talent. On the topic of more power, Superiority is arguably the more reliable and consistent way of getting it rather than Deadly Frequency, though it can't be activated freely. Precognition is technically a very powerful buff for the weapon given its innately high finesse multipliers. However, the 2-second duration means you only have a very small window to make use of the damage buff, giving you 1, maybe 2 attacks to have the benefit. On the other hand, Repose, which gives you plus 16% critical chance for 4 seconds, is powerful yet a bit more reliable with how much more you can do with it. The increase in critical chance means being able to hit those critical weak spots more consistently, bumping up your damage output. With all this talk of critical chance, Perfect Strike is my personal favorite for playing around with. The additional 10% critical damage isn't much and frankly doesn't really matter, but the ability to ignore hit mass from armor allows your Transonic Blades to cut through any enemy like a hot knife through butter, even crushers. To me, this blessing embodies what I imagine the Transonic Blades can do. Vibrate at a frequency that allows it to slip between the spaces of any material, effortlessly cleaving through it. Lastly, we've got Rampage that gives us a decent damage boost when we are fighting groups, and Savage Sweep to significantly improve our cleaving power against them. Blessing Combination. With the entire blessing pool covered, we see that there are technically many viable ones we can pick from, and some of them being more suited for certain situations. So to that end, I'm going to give you some blessing combinations you can think about and maybe decide whether you want to try it out or not. One pairing, which I use for my anti-tank ranger build, is Shred and Savage Sweep. This provides me with a good balance of having decent damage through higher critical chance, while being able to handle hordes and groups of melee enemies without issue thanks to the extra cleave I'm getting. An early pairing which I was using is a mix of Shred and Superiority. This allowed me to max out the raw damage output of my blades, making them very effective elite killers. Based on Reginald's latest video, he has chosen to take Shred with Riposte to really crit max his Transonic Blades. This is of course a reasonable pairing since increasing your critical chance not only increases your damage output through more consistent critical hits, but also makes any talent that interacts with crits more reliable as well. But for me, I like running Shred with Perfect Strike. While I do have a little less crit chance than Reginald's choice of Repose, I really enjoy making big chops through armored enemies. I know that we can technically already hit 2 crushes with our heavy attacks, but when you're reliably slicing through all sorts of armored enemies, you feel unstoppable. In fact, the denser they come, the better, since you can take a nice big slice into them without any worries. To me, this is a good balance between elite killing and horde clearing, further living up to the Jack of all blades name I gave it. As you can tell, I've placed Shred as an anchor blessing for all of my recommendations. It is honestly hard to argue against it because it just works. No need to worry about how many enemies you are fighting or if they're aggro on you or not. But with so many viable choices, you can honestly take your Transonic Blade in any direction, even without Shred if you don't want to rely on crits, which you can, because this weapon is weak spot focus more than crit. Adjust it to the needs of your build and experiment is what I say. Alright, that's it for the deep dive on the Transonic Blades. This is probably one of the most enjoyable weapons I've played with. Not only are they decently strong, but their unique mechanic and pretty relevant blessing pool makes it a very interesting weapon to play with. I only wish that the switching animation was a little quicker to better chain into the follow-up attacks. Right now, it feels a little slow, which leaves me exposed while trying to make the swap in very high intense situations. Given how hard the assassin stance hits Carapace, I've been building something that leans entirely into that. A Transonic Blade that's less Jack of all blades and more Master Armor Shredder. Subscribe if you want to follow along for that, and if this video helped you, a like goes a long way. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Varlets.